Yeah, that's better.
All right, we're going to call this meeting to order. It is the October 9th, 2014 of the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee. I can't believe that we're 3/4 away from 2014. I'm baffled right now. All right, so first is roll call.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Present.
Kyle? Here.
One came up.
Mr. Hanson?
Thank you.
We do have order.
On the
All right, Craig, would you mind doing the public involvement announcement?
Sure, all AMATS meetings are public meetings and the public is invited to comment. We have a business item, we'll have presentation by staff or a consultant, and then the committee will be given an opportunity to discuss it, and at that point, the public will be invited to comment.
So first up is the approval of the agenda. Move to approve.
second.
Moved by Ms. Howe, second by Mr. Lindsay. Are there any opposed?
I just want to point out that I think we have removed every mature tree in the Pacific Northwest in order to print your packets today. Is there any paper? Is there?
Yeah. So what we're saying is don't change the
Project.
All right, hearing none, we are so hearing no opposition. Director Joe, Mr. Morris has joined us. All right, next up is the approval of the meeting minutes for last month's meeting, September 11th, 2014. Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Kyle, second by Mr. Lindsay. Are there any opposed to the motion? Hearing none, we are so moved. And thank you. It is really nice being able to read through what we did last month right before we come to this one, so I know what we talked about. Appreciate it. So, moving right along, item 5A, business items, the 2014 operating agreement revisions.
All right, so at our last meeting where we discussed the public involvement plan update, there was some discussion on two items that we talked about, had suggested for our operating agreement revision. So that was, one would be the name change, and the other one would be the creation of a citizens advisory committee. So I did two things. If you have in the packet, you'll see this one-page addendum sheet, and then there's the operating agreement behind that. And that would be the business item before you today. And then right after that, you'll see the small sheet that says bylaws of the AMATS Citizens Advisory Committee. So the operating agreement changes. If you look at the first page there, you'll see where it talks about the Citizens Advisory Committee, and the P&Z is crossed out, and then it talks about the creation of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and at the bottom it discusses the makeup of that. The operating agreement doesn't go into great detail for the other advisory committees in terms of who might be on that. That's usually left up to the bylaws. And so that's kind of what we did here. It's just created the framework of the idea of the Citizens Advisory Committee. And then what I provided you in the bylaws would be the strong man that Cindy suggested creating. So it will allow us to get that around. The bylaws is not something that I was intending you to take up today as a business item. This is just for informational to start the creation of a Citizens Advisory Committee. We would have to change the operating agreement before we could get to the process of that. So this is before you today. I guess my thought is talk about it. You could release it here for a public review, or you can ask the policy committee to do that. Either way is fine. I kind of would think we could release it today, but whatever you folks want to do. Certainly don't. Hadn't expected approval today because you just saw it for the first time.
Something. First, aren't we solutions right now? Isn't our name officially a solution?
Right.
It says here on section 4, study.
You mean right up at the top? Yeah, that's the change, changing the system.
No, but for hurting.
Well, the reason I did it this way is because, I mean, in the operating agreement, this is what it says right here. It says, AMATS stands for Anchorage Metropolitan Transportation Solutions, note the as previously met study. I could say, I mean, I could add the language, note the as previously met study and previously met solutions, but that seems a little redundant.
So where we study first and solutions?
Yes, we were study, then solutions. I mean, we could wordsmith the language to include the word solutions. It's just that the operating agreement changed from, in the 2002 agreement changed from study to solutions, and I just took out that interim step. Just to note that.
That's the first thing. Second thing is, don't we usually have a, you know, your little memorandum, the cover sheet that goes and explains all this?
We sometimes do, we don't always do that, but
I mean, isn't that in our current public development plan to provide cover sheets with memos?
I'm not positive that's in there that says that requires that. Apologize for running out of time.
Thank you for the, for, that's all.
Question for you, Craig, on the second to last paragraph there. Focus of the CAC is to provide transparency and community perspective. The CAC is responsible for advising the AMATS policy committee regarding plans. Blah, blah, blah. That's all good, of course. The other advisory committees generally include mention of attacking them. This one's different. That's intentional, I suppose. I'd like to know what the thought process is.
In the bylaws themselves, it includes that provision that was just added to all of the other committees that talks about how the language specifically is assist, advise, and submit recommendations to the AMATS policy committee through the AMATS TAC. So that's included in the bylaws. It didn't include it in the operating agreement itself. It's not in there for everyone in the operating agreement, but again, add that in. Make sure the same language that's in the other advisory committees is in there, and this one's in the bylaws. Yeah, there would not be a difference in how they operate. They definitely would have to come to the TAC before they get to the policy.
How much of this language is included in the current operating agreement? Is this language, is the narrative here very similar? It's hard to say. Has this changed? I mean, is the description of the roles?
The 5.4?
Yeah.
That is all new. None of that's in there.
Okay. So there's not even a section 5.4 that talks about the planning and zoning commission?
The section that's in there is pretty small. I mean, it basically just talks about the P and D, and, you know, there are board of the commission that we utilize them as our city advisory committee.
Okay, so it doesn't say anything about providing transparency in the community?
No,
That's all.
I added that. I looked at, just as background, I looked at, I think, 45 different MPOs around the country to see how different city advisory committees were made up. And the vast majority of them do not have citizens advisory committees. And so the ones that did, which was about 5 out of the 45 or so I looked at, this was language that I kind of grabbed from bits and pieces because I thought it really stood out and emphasized what we were trying to do. The vast majority of citizen advisory committees that do exist, you know, as you know, AMATS with just one local governing body in our area is very unique. So if you look at the Citizens Advisory Committee set in Broward County, Florida, they have 1 or 2 representatives from each local governing entity. So they'll have a 20-member board, but they have so many counties and cities and towns, that's how they make theirs up. And so we don't have that situation, so that's why I kind of made it as 9 at-large members.
And this helps meet a recommendation from FHWA during our certification reviews, right?
Right, in our certification review, when FHWA and FDA talked about our city advisory committee, they suggested that we see what kind of things that we could do to broaden the cross-section that occurs on planning and zoning to kind of better represent Anchorage, the AMATS area. They expressed concern about the makeup at the time that the certification occurred, and how they didn't quite feel did that in an acceptable way. It was not a finding, it wasn't a corrective action. I mean, it wasn't a corrective action, it was a finding. So they're aware that we're interested in what we can do to assist in that area.
I think I agree, before this goes out for public comment, I think it does make sense to have a cover sheet explaining why we're doing it, what the, things like the audit finding, and the other impetus for cleanliness and exactly what's changed and that sort of thing. I think that would be helpful to the public.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hanson?
Yeah, and I don't have any issues with it. I'm glad I got a copy of it. I did read through it, and I had some other comments on it that I think probably they're smaller. And on the definitions on the official streets and highways plan, I don't think this definition is complete because it's an official document approved by the municipal assembly, not just. So I think that needs to be added in there. Just probably a suggestion. On page 6, under AMATS policy, item 4, I'm still not down at the bottom. It says, prepare and approve all joint financial participation in related operating agreements. And I don't know what those are.
I'm assuming it basically means this document, and this is our only operating agreement.
Well, it says approve all related operating agreements, so I'm not sure what that does.
I asked Lance because he wrote it, but this is well before my time, that language.
I think it was in the event that the policy committee wanted to come forward, the MPO or AMATS wanted to make a financial agreement with some other entity, let's say the housing authority or some other organization, that this body would then have, they would have to sign the agreement between those two to work together. That was the intent. So it's something that we currently don't have. It would just be that if we wanted to do a public-private partnership or some other financial commitment, then an agreement was required, then the policy committee would be ready to sign.
And then on page 8, down here, under the 5.3.1, I'm not sure whether you missed taking out the municipal planning and zoning commission. You did on that.
Could you go?
Oh, boy, I see. You know, I'm so used to reading these documents. And that was it. Those are just my comments.
Follow on to Terry there. Page 5, there's a definition of safety loop. Map 21.
I'm sorry, what?
Map 21, the definition could be added to the operating agreement. Safety loop's a bit dated.
Can make a federal case. Yeah.
I just have a process question, and I would encourage you to think about this. This operating agreement is an operating agreement between literally the municipality of Anchorage and the governor. And so I think it would be appropriate to let the policy committee decide as to whether or not they want this to be released for public review, because even though we might think it's a good idea, the policy makers might have a different perspective. And so we could recommend to them that it be released for review, but at the end of the day, any adjustments or changes to even simple things like this, they're gonna require the mayor and the governor or their designee to concur with that, not just the policy committee. So since it is that type of a document, I would encourage that if it's released, let the policy committee do it, not us, with the cover memo.
Any other questions, comments?
My question is just on the bylaws. I think we talked a little bit at the public involvement work session about a straw man and what, putting out there a description, more in-depth description of what the Citizens Advisory Committee would look like and how it would work. And I think Craig's done a great job of putting that together as a draft in the bylaws, and just wondered about including this in our recommendation going forward, if that's appropriate. Would it be something that could be included in putting it out for public comment?
Or were you saying that the operating agreement itself needs to change, saying that there's going to be a Citizens Advisory Committee before we go through bylaws of the Citizens Advisory Committee, correct?
That's how I see it. If the policy committee decides, hey, we agree with the name change, great idea, but we don't think you should change your citizen advisory committee, then, they may disagree with the TC, they may disagree with my recommendation. So that would seem to be the right thing to do.
If this goes to, for illustrations, I recommend a draft watermark put on it somewhere or something, or intermittent, or something here that, so, because this looks pretty official right now. There's nothing on here that says draft or shows.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't figuring on taking it to the TC yet, because I figured there was some kicking around to go here, but.
Well, right here it says adopted by the policy committee in November 2015. That just makes the assumption that it's going to be.
I'm hopeful.
Bunch of chickens.
With this committee, no, I don't.
Any other questions or comments from me before we open it up to the public? Then we open it to the public at this time. Are there any questions or comments on item 5A, the 2014 operating agreement revisions? Sorry, I'm reading in my ear. Okay. Going once, going twice? Hearing none, matter lies complete.
I move that we recommend amendment of the operating agreement as indicated in this addendum.
Yes?
Sorry, to the policy committee, yes.
With the changes that were
Yes.
as well. So moved by Ms. Duncan, seconded by Ms. Howe. Are there any opposed to that motion? Hearing none,
Do
Your
you, so that'll be the amendment to the revisions to the operating agreement only. Do we want me to do the bylaws or
I'd say
not?
just share it with them, Craig, because
Okay.
I think in the.
As
Madam Chair,
proposed.
if I could, Mayor, just give it to them as information, because in theory, you don't say
Yeah.
who the members are. Just
And with
Those
the
other-
memo.
No,
Agreed.
just for informational purposes,
The fish is on the cover.
I will not be in the policy committee, nor will James. It won't be there, so we will, then we have staff representatives. We'll let them know.
Care of them in your absence.
That's fine.
All right, so do we have, I know next we have the business item, but you know, need to be a business item, but 2040 NTP update.
I believe I was asked to add the NTP update on there as a business item, so that as we're going through this process, similar to what we did with the last NTP update, that we give ourselves the opportunity if there are short notice to the votes that we need to take. We have it here. All I want to do today real quickly is give you an update. And on the, not only MTP, but the other projects that we have that are kind of tying into that. So the MTP, we have an internal draft going through the, just the AMATS staff right now, and we hope to get that over to DOT tomorrow. And from the draft of the
We asked you to expedite it.
You said get it going. You
Impressive.
just get it in-house.
Right.
It's a little thinner than the one that so. He will be over at DOT for a short period of time, and then we'll get it down through purchasing and start that joyous process.
So do you have the calendar and where we can get?
Well, we have so many updates related to that, to the different projects. I know that all of our other contracts are under, all of other projects are under contract and rolling right along, and several of them are going to be presented on today. We have the MTP, the freight mobility study still to come, but other than that, everything else is moving along. I don't have an updated calendar right now because moving parts are moving so fast that we get all of them to get it updated, so that's all I have right now,
Do
unfortunately.
we have one?
Are there any other business items? All right, then moving right along, we're on to the informational items. So item 6A is the AMATS travel model update review.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Teresa Brewer, and we went out and selected a consultant for our travel demand model update. So I want to thank the project team members that are here, Christine Sabig, Jane Atkin, a few other folks, Chris Langley, were on the team, Craig Lang, and myself. I think Lance was also on that team. And we selected a consultant, RSG, and it's Jeff Conja. RNN is here, Spring Consultants is here, and Gal Group is here. And they are all part of the sub-consultants working on the project. And you have a couple technical memorandums before you on items that we need you to review and take a look at. And I will hand it over to Jeff now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for having us. As Teresa said, I'm Jeff Conja of RSG. I'm the project manager from the consultant team selected to update your travel demand model. Calvin, Juan Lee, John Spring, who are part of the consultant team as well. And we have both the informational briefing for you and a heads up of an action that we'll be asked to take. And I will explain those things as we go through the presentation today. You should have copies of the slides in front of you. So you can spin around and look at the screen or look at the paper copies. While you're moving, I'll just say on a personal note that I'm excited to be working here. I'm an outdoors person myself, so the chance to come to this wonderful place is exciting to me on a personal level. On a professional level, the image on the screen outlines the topics I'd like to brief you on today. I'm going to spend a little time on the process of updating the model, talk about some of the teams or process components, including the review group's role, the model user group's role, a few high-level schedule milestone dates, and your role as particularly what we're asking you to do today. I want to spend a little bit of time then talking about the actual objectives that AMATS staff have asked us to work on as part of the update, which include some data items that I'm sure you can imagine, as well as actual changes to model features and capabilities. And then, of course, talk about the planning assumptions, which is a key business item for yourselves, which are the socioeconomic, in other words, population and base year and future year projections. Before I get into that, as folks already mentioned, there are several other projects in play that actually inform this model development effort. We probably have already talked about the household travel survey effort and the accompanying transit on board survey effort. So it turns out that our firm is actually conducting those with another consultant team, a branch of transportation market research specialists who are leading that. So there's really totally separate staff, but we are coordinating with them and ensuring that their work is going to feed the model in useful ways. So as a part of this contract, we also are doing an origin destination traffic surveying using Bluetooth technology on both external stations that come into the modeled space, which we'll see in a moment, and the municipalities, both Matsu and Anchorage's traffic engineers are gathering supporting data for us, as is the Alaska DOT traffic engineering department. And it's not so much a technical part of the model per se, although it might be, but your staff also asked us as a part of this effort to review best practices for the types of financial analysis that go into determining whether the investment list or the project list with accompanying program costs is financially constrained in the formal definition of the MPO planning requirements. And so I have some separate staff who will start up on that effort soon. That will come in the form of essentially a technical memorandum that describes their findings and possible options for AMATS to consider for doing that type of analysis. Part of the reason I believe it's in the model update process is that, as you probably imagine, the travel model inputs themselves obviously contain a data set of the modelable projects and investments like street widenings or transit additions. And so there's already sort of an organizational structure about some of the investment information that would feed that type of financial analysis. So that's going to be coming down the road as well. For if I may, the folks of the model users group, the meeting is going to start right after this presentation, we hope. So they'll be down the hall. Talking about the model update process, then AMATS staff have formed a review group in front of sort of the advisory committee to staff on the substance of the enhancements and the various work products and work questions that go into updating a model of this scale and complexity. And so the staff listed in blue are the standing members of that group. At the bottom, there are some additional specialists who are going to be called in for specific topics, such as the planning assumptions or the street networks, because they have engineering or land use planning expertise. Teresa Brewer is the AMATS project manager, so she's my main contact point on your side. And several of the review group are present today. As already mentioned, part of the actual contract we have is to enhance the ability of AMATS to coordinate with peer agencies and other stakeholders of the planning process, and specifically the travel model applications. And so we suggested to staff that a model users group, which is a forum that many MPOs have, would be a useful way of doing that. And they thought that was a good idea. So we have gone ahead and formed a model users group that consists of, basically those who are interested in the model for practical reasons or policy reasons, which of course includes consultancies like folks on the update team. Peer agencies are naturally welcome. In other areas, academic people often have an interest in useful things to say. So the current stakeholder involvement plan has a list of these folks. In my opinion, membership is open to those who are interested, so that can always be updated. We conducted a web-based survey of the original list of folks that were proposed for the model users group and have already gotten some useful feedback on elements of the model that should be looked at during the update process. And my suggestion to you, as someone who worked for the Puget Sound Regional Council for 10 years, would be that you consider sustaining the model users group as an ongoing forum after this particular update contract terminates, but of course that's up to you guys. In my past, I have found it to be a useful venue. I promised to talk a little bit about the schedule. It is an ambitious schedule, scheduled to be complete in its entirety in June, at the end of June of next year. And although we can go into details if folks want, I think it's best thought of at a general level as having three main phases. The first phase of which is going to update what I call the foundation data, which are the road networks, transit networks, the analysis zone boundaries, and of course the socioeconomic data. And so that's scheduled to be complete. And there's individual products in there are staged over time, but in its entirety, it's basically going to be done in the October-November timeframe of this year. Looking then at the actual enhancements and additions to the functional components of the model, there's a series of those that we'll talk about in a moment. Those are generally scheduled to be done in a purely functional sense by the spring of 2015, with, of course, validation, calibration, and documentation and training, and the handoff ultimately to the AMATS staff by the end of June of next year. Just a footnote, the household travel survey data in a usable form is expected to be done by the end of November, so that's part of what informed this stage. So I want to talk a little bit about your role then as well. You have before you paper copies of two different memos, one of which describes a point in time in the evolution of the network and analysis zone data updates, the other of which is focused purely on the socioeconomic projections. The contents of those memos describe both methods and interim data products. In the case of the TAS and network memo, since we're on such a tight schedule, work progressed on the actual data after the point at which the memo was drafted. And so some of the data products I'm going to reference later are actually more mature than this memo would suggest. But the important thing I suggest for your review and feedback to AMATS staff, and Teresa is your point of contact for that, please, is the protocols and rules of thumb we're using, by which I mean, for example, sizing analysis zones so that they can support transit analysis and things like that. Clearly, the network may also be of interest to you if you have particular projects or analysis in mind, so you're welcome to look at that. And I'll be telling you later about where to find the actual current draft digital files that contain the network and analysis zone draft data. On the actual socioeconomic data, both in the base year and the future years, we're going to spend more time on that later in the presentation. But I want to be clear right now that the action that staff will be asking you to take is to actually recommend approval of the regional scale data and projections. And so, therefore, these memos will be things that we are essentially asking you to review with some care. So let's go on and talk about some of the materials we're asking you to review. The rest of this presentation is really not so much attempting to go through all the details that are in the memo, but to give you some guideposts as you think about the memo contents and review them, perhaps with the help of your own staff. I've already really covered much of this. This is what I call the foundation data. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the fact that the foundation data includes an update to spatial representation of pedestrian and bicycle facilities so that the future updates can better estimate the choice of those modes during the model analysis. And of course, we're hoping that the users group will go into more detail with us and give us lots of useful information, sort of flush out some new things here that we can include in these data sets. This is actually the October 6th draft, which will be made available to you digitally, of the traffic analysis zones that are proposed for the enhanced model. And I use this phrase a lot, so I'll define it now. By model space, we mean the entire geographic area encompassed in its entirety by the actual traffic analysis zones taken all together. So that's the geographic area the model is actually saying is internal, that it's treating fully with all of its individual components like trip duration, distribution, modal choice, and assignment. So if you drew a big, I should have done this, sorry, you drew a big thick line around all those small red zones, that would be the model space. And you'll notice, of course, that it does go far out to the northwest, Willow. There's a large analysis zone north of the road that goes from Fishhook to Hatcher Pass, along this density in Anchorage. And the general rules of thumb that we use to update these are described in the memo, but they do include things like ensuring that recent additions to the roadway system are included, that there is sufficient roadway detail to carry out the types of analysis that AMATS needs to do, that there is sufficient zonal size and connectivity to support reasonable transit analysis, and things like that. Likewise, the accompanying product to that is an update to the actual road network, which of course then supports an update to the transit network. Again, the digital product of the current draft, or I should say the October 6th draft road network will be available to you. Those are the gray lines that are underlying the TASs in this image. The transit network is a work in progress as of now. Again, I already mentioned the fact that we're making sure that the rail network ensures connectivity, has the network density to support the high growth areas and things like that as those grow into future years. So there's intelligent loading of demand onto the system. And of course, the other requirement for the road network update is to fully support the current transit system and anticipated additions to the transit system. As is common with all the things I'm showing you today, actually, we're hoping that the user group folks will have insights into things that we should add or consider as part of this update. I want to outline fairly briefly the specific enhancements and additional features that staff have contracted us to provide. Given the new data collection, and I have to say from a professional standpoint, I am delighted that you folks have taken a comprehensive approach and have updated all your data. By that I mean the surveys, the transit data, things like that. At the same time, you're updating the model. It makes our work easier and will get you a more successful model at the end. So it was very wise, and thank you very much for finding the funding to do that. Not everyone manages to do that, to be honest with you. Having said that, those data will support a number of specific enhancements to the current structure of the model. We'll have new information with which to update trip generation rates, for example. With the household travel survey, we'll have new origin and destination data that will let us refine trip distribution. The household travel survey, in conjunction with the pedestrian and bicycle survey, and the transit origin destination survey, will help us enhance the mode choice model in useful ways. We are specifically engaged to enhance the truck components of the model, and we'll be actually getting some global positioning system data sets from ATRI, the American Trucking Research Institute, to support that. Those give us both route choice and origin and destination choice information. That helps both trip generation and trip distribution from a freight or truck perspective. And we are also asked to enhance the post-processing routines of the model, which I really think of as the tools that let staff tabulate and visualize the model results in ways that make them accessible to you and other stakeholders. We're also going to be adding some totally new features to get better highway assignment results. We're going to be explicitly treating intersection delay. Those are the delays that are caused by controlled intersections, stop signs, stop signals, and things like that. And as I've already mentioned, the mode choice model is going to be enhanced to treat bicycle and pedestrian choices in better and more sensitive ways. So those are the large-scale tasks. I want to segue now to the actual socioeconomic data and projections, which, as we already pointed out, are a subject of specific action in your report. These will be in the base year 2013. We suggested a base year 2013, which is recent enough to have observed data, especially in the form of traffic counts. So that's really the reason for that. 2028 and 2040 give you an intermediate year for intermediate analysis, as well as a horizon year that should get you through the federal planning requirements of your planning horizon. There's some topics we'll then have to cover in more detail now to help you understand the memo you're being asked to review on the socioeconomic data side. I'll talk briefly about the data sources that have been used to create the estimates and projections that are in the memo. Talk briefly about the methods by which those estimates were made, and then actually show you some of the tables that are also in your memo, essentially just to, again, help you navigate the memo when you have time to look at it. As you would imagine, the U.S. Census is a great source of data for this type of work. The estimate method, as we'll talk about in a moment, depends very heavily on the year-by-year estimates of population and employment from the Department of Labor and Work Development from the state level. There's a specific report cited on the screen that has been the foundation of many of the actual quantities used in the computations. And of course, the existing TAS-level distributions of population and employment in the current regional model, as well as the current version of the Matsu-Burroughs model, were used to help guide some of the sub-area allocations that we'll talk about in a moment. McDowell staff also talked directly to some of the state staff who prepare those reports and are very familiar with the way those were done to sort of do quality checking and coordinate. The methods essentially involve using the 2010 census as a foundation point, moving forward to 2013 using the ADO LWD materials, applying the growth rates then to project those 2013 base year quantities out into the future years, 2020 and 2040. Those growth rates are from the DOL. The population estimates allow the computation of a labor force participation rate, which in the base year, which is then simply carried forward. The DOL keeps very specific employer data, which allows then knowledge of the spatial distribution of employment and also the types of employment. And so the employment is not only estimated in a total sense, but across 10 different categories that are relevant to components of the travel model, particularly trip generation. And so the method, as I said, depends heavily on DOL data. As you know, the MPO is subject to federal planning regulations, which require the best available data to be used. At this time, the DOL data are considered to be the best available data. Footnote here in the last bullet of the methods is that in addition to population, employment, and household data that are described in the memo, the team is also collecting a great deal of other data that informs things that you typically label as special generators. For example, military base folks, the freight movements at the port, passenger and freight movements at the airport, and things like that. So there's a whole host of other data that are sort of down in the weeds that we are collecting, just so you know that. The process then will continue. The regional estimates are actually being done at a sub-area level, and we'll look at those in a moment as we call out some of the tables that you're going to be reviewing. So we've got the Anchorage Bowl area, Chidiac Eagle River, and Matsu-Burroughs. The reason why we're breaking out the regional estimates at sub-area level is that it makes it easier to allocate to TASs, which is a downstream task of the DH. So this is one of the tables in your written memo, but I wanted to show it on screen to be sure that folks, it makes sense to you, and if you have any questions about organization or format or what is in there, you can ask them now. But this is the total population estimates, both by sub-area and in total, in the base year and the 2 future years, with then percent growth from the base year to the intermediate year, percent growth from the intermediate year to the ultimate horizon year, and then percent growth across the entire horizon of base year to final horizon year. And not to get into the weeds, but as you probably anticipated, in percentage growth terms, the Matsu-Burroughs area is growing very rapidly. Or I should say it's projected to grow very rapidly as well. Of course, corollary to population, and in fact, very dependent upon the population estimates, are the employment estimates. Those are broken down in the same format at the totals level by sub-area and in total, with growth rates called out. Again, since this would be expected given the population growth, the Matsu area is very rapidly growing and is expected to grow in the future very rapidly. We want to spend just a moment calling out the categories of employment at which the regional estimates are being performed. As I mentioned before, the reason for this is that the trip generation component of the travel model itself is much more effective if it has estimates of employment by these categories. We have chosen these categories both based on the current model as well as our experience in other regional models. One thing that strikes me in comparison to other sub-areas, these are done by sub-area in these tabulations. The whole professional services category is clearly the dominant sector in Anchorage Bowl, whereas if you look at Judiac Eagle River, there's a much more flat distribution. For example, the entertainment sector as well as retail is much more balanced with services. Whereas in the Matsu area, you see a little bit more of that spike to the service category. So I just call these out because this is part of the entire point of doing it this way, is to have the travel model be sensitive to these differences at a sub-area and then, of course, at a single level once we break those out. So that really is the fly-through, if you will, of what's before you in the memos. I had promised you to remarkably find the digital versions of both these memos as well as the supporting data files. This is the link to a website that staff and your consultant team have put together to inform the model update and to support discussions of the model users group. It's in the packet and in your handout. And so it will be refreshed at each phase of the update process with documents. There is also an ability to, and this is what I meant for users group folks, obviously you folks are a conduit to Teresa, but the stakeholders, other stakeholders, there's a form there that they can send comments to us. Those go to our public involvement, the coordinator, Warren Lee, and of course get to the rest of the team via her. You may have some questions, and so I want to be sure that we have time for you to ask them. Have us respond. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I just have a couple. So, Jeff, our comments on the you want to get to Teresa by next Tuesday.
Yes, this is a tight turnaround because of a very tight overall schedule.
So Teresa, I have some general comments that I'll send you, and then I'll have some detailed comments that I'll send you. But just from a practical perspective, your base year, is your base year 13 or your base year 10?
The base year in which the model will be calibrated and validated is intended to be 2015.
So the network we need to be looking at is the network, not, is the 2013 network.
Exactly.
Okay. Not,
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Yes, good question.
All right. Just to get you thinking, Teresa, from a general perspective, I would look at the projections, particularly as it relates to population and employment. Look at what the chamber's using. Look at what AEDC's using. Look at what AHFC's using. When we put this thing out on the street, we're just this little organization called AMATS. This conversation about growth is occurring in this community, and those numbers are already out there. So make sure that if our numbers are drastically different, particularly on population, allocation, distribution, all of that stuff, if there's a nuance or difference, their source may or may not be nicer, Department of Labor. So just make sure that when we, that's a general comment, make sure, because there's a lot of other points out there, and we're just this little transportation business. Those other animals out there are way ahead of us and have been bought, accepted, and we come up with something different, and we're just trying to provide transportation. So maybe do a little homework before then and have a general sense.
Thank you. I understand, having spent 10 years in an MPO.
Just-
Point well taken.
Your chair has left.
And we're done.
We repelled her from the room. Sorry.
I guess if there aren't any other further questions, let them go to their user meeting and we'll go to the next one, which is Lance.
All right.
Transit.
Thank you all.
Next. Volunteer.
Warm?
Actually, sir.
Going to show up this year.
No, doesn't. I won't.
I just put some pictures in the ground.
I've heard your name come up a couple of times at DCM yesterday.
Okay. Right, of course. It's like face to face.
Yes, you do.
You seem like this.
Okay, you have to stay, okay.
It's interesting. It's really good to hear
That's awesome.
sleeping.
So I need to
Do something? And you can't sleep. So you talk.
All right.
Ready?
Ready. Okay, so I'm Lance Wilbur. I'm the Director of Public Transportation. Every year at this time, as required or recommended in our public involvement plan, is to give an update on what's going on in public transportation. We do have a lot going on. We have a lot planned. What I'm going to do is just focus primarily on some of the recent accomplishments, similar to last year, some of the recent accomplishments that we've done, some of the challenges that we are facing right now, and then some things that we're looking to in the future. A little bit about money at the end as well. So, as you guys know, here at People Mover, we run fixed route, air transit, and the van pool service. On our fixed route, we carry about a little over 300,000 people a month on our People Mover service, almost 4 million a year. On our paratransit, it's about 200,000 a year, and then our van pool, it's around 100,000 trips a year on our van pool. So this is an example or a copy of our roadway network. Some of the achievements that we've been able to accomplish in the last years, these are mostly since 2014. Many of you are aware that we turned 40 years old. Our transit hub has been downtown on 6th Avenue between G and H ever since then. The only thing different is a parking garage got built around us, a really big one. So a lot of changes have occurred in the 40 years, and then most recently, thanks to the help from folks like Jamie, people in Christine, somebody on my staff, just a lot of work trying to get Google Transit. So we also had some people from outside the organization. At UAA, there were people just interested in creating this transit application. If you haven't used it or seen it, you can go to the municipal website, or you can go to peoplemover.org and just play with it. It's very, very cool. When you do it, it'll tell you, put in where you want to go, and it doesn't have to be that specific. It could be at an intersection, it could be at a building, and the opposite could be, you could put in first in Maple and the start, and at the end you could put Frontier Building. And then you pick a day when you want to leave, and it'll tell you how long it's going to take you to get to the nearest bus stop, how long the bus ride is, if there's a transfer, and how long it'll take you to get to the end of your trip. It's a really amazing tool. It's been a long time coming. Some of the other things that are going on, many of you are aware of the onboard survey. that took place between the 18th and the 28th of September. We should have some initial results of that in early December. Looking forward to that. Again, what people are doing on the bus, where they're coming from, going to, did they make transfers, is the service the kind of service that they're looking for. We also have some other onboard surveys, a little bit different on our anchor rides and on our van pool program, which were more kind of customer service based. This interactive voice response, it's a tool that allows a passenger to basically, it's a phone messaging system to interact as to where your bus is going to be coming from and going to, and it relates to our bus tracker system. We have a lot of information about how to ride the bus in a variety of different ways. Folks down in customer service and marketing and others have been able to put some of that information in multiple languages. It's available on DVD. And then this last item, starting in May, actually starting prior to that, the Anchorage School District approached us about doing a pilot program. So if you have a friend or a student that goes to East High School, their student pass or their student ID is a bus pass smart card. We bought smart cards blank. We gave them to East High School. They load the student's picture ID. They load all the information on it. Students and faculty at East High can ride public transportation at no cost anytime they want. They can use it to and from school. They can use it to get to work. They can use it to go to the mall, whatever they want to do. And it's really a pilot to see how it's going to work. District paid us $30,000, and the estimate on how much revenue it would be to if they were just riding straight out. Spending a lot of time on this one here because last month we had 5,000 trips just in September of people using the smart card in the month, which is literally 10% of our ridership. It's pretty astounding. And if it's successful, we'll look at other programs, probably East and Diamond, because they have the next best service. So we'll keep you posted on that. I mentioned this before. One of the things that I look to as a director, which I think is related to good customer service, is if you tell somebody you're going to be someplace, be there. Our on-time performance is at 82, and 2014 to date is at 82.3%, which is, our goal is between 80, it's around 85. That average over the years, as I mentioned before, we do not adjust for delays in construction. We do not adjust if we cancel service due to weather, if there's an accident that we have to, or a detour or construction. We average all of that in, and we're at 82.3% within 5 minutes of the scheduled time when we say we're going to be there at all of our locations. So honestly, if we took all of those things out, we would probably be in the low to middle 90s within 5 minutes. So that, I'm really proud of that. It's a lot of work from our drivers. Some of the other things that we've done, maybe you've seen some of these. Let's see if this is the, I hate to press the wrong button. It's the middle picture there with the MV, it's an MV1. It's a new vehicle to see drive around town. It looks like, it's brutally utilitarian. Without any cool stickers on it, it looks Eastern European. I mean, like it looks something out of, it's like a Volkswagen on steroids. It's really kind of, but when you go into it, what happens, it's really a paratransit vehicle. There is a driver's seat, there's no passenger seat. So if someone's in a wheelchair, they can load in from either side of the vehicle and they can sit literally where a passenger is in their own wheelchair. We bought 14 of them. We're going to see how they work. They're literally a Ford chassis, but one of the reasons it kind of took us a little long to get them out on the street is that we went to DMV to register them, and we told them we had an MV1. It wasn't on the list. It wasn't next to Ford. So they had to load that new vehicle into their system. I mean, you can get a Bugatti and bring it in and register, but you can't get an MV1. So some of the other things that we've done is our fleet itself, we've done some changes over the years, but this is probably the biggest change we've had in 2014. So if you see them around, the kids think they're pretty cool. Knock on the window, they want the driver to know where to get one of those. It's wait 7 years, we'll surplus it, we can hook you up. Yeah, 200,000 miles, as Jamie suggested. On the bus stops improvements, we spend about $500,000 a year annually on bus stops. And in addition to that 500, we do a lot of work with DOT roadway projects and PM&E roadwork projects, so a lot of accolades, and honestly, they do a lot of civil work for us, and we buy the equipment. So we actually do more bus stop improvements than our tip money provides, so it's incorporated in a lot of those improvements. Ken?
And thank you for the surplus shelter there.
Right.
Half the smokers of our building.
You know, it's what we do. We're non-discriminatory in the bus business. So, you're welcome. We did, yeah, I'll tell you, there's a backstory to that. So, honestly, we do a lot of great things, I think, at public transportation. We have 150 people that work in our business. 95 of them are bus drivers, 30 of them are mechanics. Everything else is planning, programming, budgeting, customer service, marketing for the other 20. So we have a new superintendent, Abul Hassan. I don't know if many of you met him. We're very lucky to have him on board. He comes to us from the West Coast. From the East Coast. He's outside of Maryland, really a top hand. Honestly, all of my crew, I'm very, very happy. They think outside the box, and I give them a long leash. It's all I can do to keep up with them. Our drivers put up with a lot of crap, and I give them a lot of credit for doing what they do. They ought to have marriage licenses and social service counseling certificates and a lot of things. They do amazing things. We've made some improvements to our facilities and have a little bit more to go. Our budget, even though our budget continues to go down, and it's been reduced for the last 6 years, every year, we are being creative with the money that we have. We have some safety issues and safety enhancements and cameras. If you're interested in that, in April, we had a safety assessment from the TSA, and we'll get their report, and they have some recommendations for us. The bottom, we still continue to look at those 5 things right there is the things that I look at in our department to make sure that we can continue to improve our business. These are some challenges and unknowns, and I'm going to add one on here. Our staffing, we really have a tough time finding enough bus operators and mechanics, mostly the mechanics. Right now, we have 8 mechanic positions, and 4 of them are vacant. It's really, really hard to keep our preventive maintenance. It's not that, it's not a matter of working at public transportation. It's kind of, I don't know if the engineering community is still finding good engineers, but as it was, but there are not enough mechanics in Alaska, heavy equipment mechanics in Alaska to pick it up. So we're feeling it, the district, Cummins, everybody's feeling it. So it's really kind of a challenge. So our guys are working, we've changed all their shifts. It's really a lot of work. Passenger conduct. This one here has really come up at our public transit advisory board. A lot of people have really raised their eye about people that are riding the bus or would ride the bus, but they see poor passenger conduct, which is really a small percentage of the ridership. So we've been working at ways to address that. It's crazy. I signed 2 banned letters this week. So if you see, what's his name? I don't know, Mr. Scott. Anyway, I get these home videos and I see him doing poor performance and tell him to start walking. Ridership and revenues. Honestly, something's going on in our ridership. It's down about 4%. Our revenues are likewise then down as well. There is no magic about what's going on in ridership. A couple examples. We did not change the fare structure at all for the youth. Their ridership's down over 20%. We didn't touch it. The adults, we raised it, and it's up 11%. It's just free. Not only did we change the amount, we changed the structure. So I think there's some folks that are combining trips, and so there's some changes going on with our revenues. The revenues are affecting our future service. And the last one I want to point out here, and I only got a couple more slides, the unknown and challenge is really our technology and our ITS. We're at a situation, for the last decade, we have been adding a lot of technology. We know a lot about what's going on in our service. We can track buses. We can tell what a person's eye color is when they get on the bus and if it's the same when they get off. No, I'm just joking. We have a lot of information, but our technology is getting to a point where it's old. And we're gonna start thinking about what we're gonna do for the next decade. Some of the things in the future, we're always gonna be looking at our on-time performance, looking whatever we can do to make sure that our customers are being well cared for, that we're addressing their needs, and whether it's on-time performance or passenger conduct or equipment, facilities, we'll continue to do that. One of the things that we do all the time, that has nothing really related to money, is Christine, Sunday, and our planning crew, and our operations people, we're really looking at whether or not the service we provide on the street is still good service. Just because we do it, we don't assume it's good. So we may take it away and reallocate it to other places. In the last couple of years, we added service to 2 routes, and those have been very well received and a lot of productivity on them. And the last one, improved and updated facilities and our fleet. On our fleet, we are going to need, we're going to continue to do that. The next big hiccup or big bump we're going to have is in 2018. We have to replace 11 buses. We have an $11 to $12 million bus buy in 2018 to put them on the street in 2020. So it's a big, we got to replace 18 vehicles. So we got a lot of other things going on there. And then facilities, many of you have heard about Midtown. I know that in the TIP, we've got $300,000 to do site selection. As soon as, now that the TIP is, we're in a new federal fiscal year, I will be working to get that money in place, and appropriated and obligated, so that we can put an RFP on the street that's already written. We're also having some issues over in East Anchorage, over at Muldoon and DeBar. Our facilities out there, as they are interim, we'll figure out a way to make some changes in there. And then 2 more slides. This is, those of you who might not know, this is just our operating budget. Our entire operating budget is literally 56%, as you can see, $14 million. Our entire operating budget is about $23 million. So you can see what portion's coming from grants, what portion's coming from revenues, and what portion's coming from state grants. Kind of where we spend our money, we spend 62% of our money on personnel, salaries, wages. The 11%, we spend $2.7 million on fuel. That's for everything. We burn 10,000 gallons a week of diesel just running the buses, which is nothing compared to the railroad. They spend that much probably just firing up the engines to leave the depot. They burn a lot of fuel. And then supplies, and then contracts, other services. Our contract services to Anchor Rides is around $3 million a year. Anyway, that's really a quick summary of what's been going on in People Mover. Sorry about that. That last picture that you saw, I'm not even going to try. We have an art contest on the bus, and those are a group of 8th graders that we're going through a little show and tell through our transit facility. And one of our buses, I don't know, you'd think 8th graders wouldn't like a cool bus wash, but even when they're, how old's an 8th grader? 13. They still like getting in a big bus and going through a car wash. Anyway, they just love it. And then we have do any of you have kids that go to Baggage Middle School? All right. That's probably not a bad thing. I mean, that is a good thing, because they'll probably have a selfie. We have an ambulance that's literally, all the seats have been ripped out, and it's got stretchers in it in the event of a mass evacuation and emergency. There's dummies in the stretchers. So we let them on the bus, and they took a lot of selfies with the dummies. So there they are with the dummy on a stretcher in this bus. So anyway, lots going on, a lot is going to happen. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. All right. That's it.
I have a question, a selfie.
I know.
I taught you something.
Thank you, Jamie. So when I say dial, my daughter goes, what? Okay, that's it. Thanks, Greg. Thank you. Okay.
Was this the last one?
No.
Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate that.
We have 2 in a row.
Come a long way.
I know, right?
2 updates in a row by Vivian. The first one is the CMP project, and then she'll follow or segue right into the ITS. And then we'll Finish with air quality transmission. Matt is gonna do, but he'll need the projector.
Oh, he'll need it.
It's not from the projector.
Oh, he's not.
Jessica, her budget doesn't look changed for any reason.
We have a choice, I can either put this PowerPoint up on the contractor, or we can look at the hard-to-read handout.
If you have the PowerPoint, I'll put it up there, and is that for CMP?
In a thumb drive?
Yes.
Okay, well, why don't you start with ITS? Do ITS, and I'll load that up. I'll go get the CMP one.
Oh, how kind of
You
you.
do ITS, while I go get CMP.
Okay.
Rotate it up.
Okay, so we'll do ITS.
Are you sure?
I think so.
Well, for this, you just have a memo. And we're finally getting started with the ITS. ITS is being known as Intelligent Transportation Systems, and that's using advanced technology and communications in an integrated manner to improve the surface transportation system. We've hired a consultant, Carson Springerhoff, to help us with this update, and also the sub on this is Cambridge Systematics. It turns out that the same team in reverse is the same team on the congestion management process update. So we have a nice synergy there, and we'll be able to coordinate these two projects. I won't take a lot of time with this right now, but two things are nice about this project. It's going to support the congestion management objective-driven, performance-based congestion management process update. And also we're going to have a workshop to develop a future traffic operations center concept of operations. And it's going to be in coordination with the state traffic operations center project that's going on right now. So most of the projects that were recommended in the original plan have already been done, and it's time for that. We're confident in the contractor because he did the first one, so we think it's going to be good. And I don't really have too much more to tell you about that right now. You all are going to become very busy. And in December and February and April, we're going to have back-to-back presentations to you on this project as well as the congestion management process update. And I'm going to slide into the CMP update now. The congestion management process is something that we are required to do by federal planning regulations. So a congestion management process is really just a systematic and regionally accepted approach to managing congestion. And it basically follows a couple of steps with goals and objectives, performance measures, monitoring the system, and strategies to improve congestion. And so we've had a congestion management plan for a long time. John Spring managed the contract for this beast in 1994. We haven't really updated the document in all this time, but we have effectively updated the process with the transportation plan updates. So, but because of MAP 21, new goals, national goals, and the emphasis on performance-based, outcome-based management, we need to take a new look at the congestion management, mostly the performance measures. And there is a push from the Federal Highway Administration to look to have SMART objectives, which are specific, measurable, and agreed upon. Think of R, it stands for realistic and time-bound. So, oh, thank you. Oh, that's great. The main thing I need to ask you all to do is, the reason I'm giving the presentation is Teresa Brewer is the project manager. She's in that other meeting with the model update. But I'm co-project manager, and so I can step in for her at these opportunities. Would like to invite you to participate as the technical committee for this project. And what that means is that we're going to have to ask you all to please review some key deliverables, and if you can be as interested as you want to be or as involved. But there are the same dates as the ITS architecture presentations. We're going to have presentations for you on December the 4th and February 8th. And what I'd like to do is just run right through this. You probably can't read, this is so small, I don't know if you can read it. But hired Cambridge Systematics to help us with this project. So one of the main goals is to make this project MAP 21 compliant and support the ongoing CNP implementation and maintenance, and to define the public involvement plan, which has basically been done, and update the status of the system report to represent 2014 conditions, and develop a web-based dashboard to display multimodal systems. And we're also going to have a data management plan. So these are the FHWA basic 8 steps for developing the congestion management process. These are things that we always do. Objectives: define the network, develop performance measures, monitor the system, analyze problems and needs, strategies, and evaluate strategy effectiveness. And one thing I'd like to tell you is that on our last FHWA certification, which was in 2010, we did have 2 corrective actions for the congestion management plan. And this congestion management process update will address those. And I can tell you what they are if you're interested. One is to identify an implementation schedule, responsibilities and possible funding sources for each selected strategy, and an implementation of a process for periodic assessment of the effectiveness of the strategy. So, now, what this outlines is the steps we're doing, but also what we're going to need your input in as the technical committee, and we're just assuming that you're going to help us with this because it's a key input to the Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. The schedule, I'll look at the schedule, that's the last slide. So next month in November, which this doesn't appear on this slide, we'll have a teleconference with you with Cambridge Systematics, and they'll present the results of an online survey that you hopefully have already received your invitation to in the mail. And also the goals, the regional objectives for the project. Would you please check your email and see if you have an invitation from Dina Snyder from Cambridge Systematics asking you to participate in the survey. It's basically just to get your idea of where you think the bottlenecks are, where you think, what congestion means to you, and it's quick, it's easy, it's not detailed, and we would really appreciate your taking the survey. December is going to be a very packed meeting. We're going to be talking with you about defining the area and network, and reviewing the objectives to make sure they're realistic and specific and achievable.
Vivian, might be better to have a work session with this?
Well,
So
that's
have
my
you-
next, that was one of my questions was, we need to ask you, the thing is, when we present things to you, we're going to need comments from you, like no later than 2 weeks after we present these documents to you. So you're going to have what we give you to review a week before the TAC meeting, and then 2 weeks to give us your comments back. There are several technical memoranda, but the performance measures are really important with this. The public involvement plan for this piece is basically the AMATS meetings, because we're going to look at these things again through the MTP update. So really, the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee review and participation is really crucial.
Second is Kyle's notion of a work session,
Yeah.
several work sessions, and I think it would make sense to schedule them at this point, such that people do not fill up their calendars.
Right, okay. At what point in the process do you want the work sessions?
We need the document for a little bit to digest.
I'm sorry, what?
We need the documents in advance hours to try to assimilate before.
We want the work session. Okay, well, we'll talk with the consultant. We won't be able, it will be staff-led, the work sessions.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you don't need a work session like right now just to get the introduction to the
No.
project, right?
No.
But I
Okay.
would like a copy of the last set of the published efforts that we've had on this.
Okay.
If I
all
can get a
right.
link to that, that would be helpful to
All right.
have some foundational background.
We do have a project website that's just gearing up, and we're going to put the deliverables there, and we can put this link to this document too.
It's just really hard to go have a meeting and say, okay, here's your input, here's all this stuff, and just get inundated with this without having an opportunity to think about it, talk about it, go into depth in certain things, have a discourse in a formal meeting.
I
Just
agree.
doesn't work very well.
No, it doesn't. And the thing is, we are on a tight schedule too, because the project's supposed to end in May. I mean, we're just gonna be boom, boom, boom.
And see, then if we had, then at the meeting, if you had very specific, this is what we need your blessing on, or these are the, make a decision between this and this, that's fine. I mean, that would be much better.
Okay.
Than if going in and saying, here's all the stuff, give us your comments, it's like, I mean, seriously, it's difficult. If there's not, if you can't narrow it down and say, we need input on this or this. I mean, do you want this one or do you want this one? And then have a work session ahead of time saying, here's your two options and these are the things about it. And then at your next TAC meeting, we need you to make a decision between these two things.
Right.
You will get something from that.
We'll be happy to. And that was one of our questions, was how did you want to schedule meetings and workshops and that kind of thing?
Yeah, then it'd be productive.
Yes.
But just getting inundated with a bunch of stuff is
It's impossible.
No.
Right.
you know, so.
Well, thank you. We'll do that. That's a good idea. So I don't know that I need to go through, I don't want to overwhelm you with all of this.
Well, and I would suggest the same thing with the other guy who was first talked, because I tell you, that was.
Scratch that from the record.
Well, it's just, I was just like, holy smokes, this is a lot of stuff.
It
and-
is a lot. It's like
and-
a fire hose, right?
Yeah, well, and it's good as an overview, but holy crap, you know.
Fortunately, with the travel demand model, they have a users group.
Yeah.
So they'll be doing, the
Most of
yeoman's
the-
work on it. And it'll come
Biggest-
back to you as a report, but.
The biggest thing that I can see about the whole thing is we need to come up with a recommendation to the policy committee to set the boundaries of how this MTP is gonna look.
Right.
We talked about that, a resolution.
Right, a resolution. So you have, not only will that affect your contract, but it's gonna affect how we use all this stuff and whatnot. And so, what you wanna put in that resolution, understanding those items and the importance of them are the key pieces as far as when we talk about all this.
And the assumptions.
I mean, yeah.
Everybody's going to get on the same page about the assumptions.
Mhm. So, I mean, it was great, but it's just like, whoa, it's a lot.
Right.
And so to me, I mean, in this position, it's these really key pieces that we need to understand and focus on, because we gotta recommend to the policy committee a technical resolution to keep boundaries on this MTP.
Oh, yes, and to answer your earlier question, I'm sorry, this is an aside, but it's a small group now. About the MTP, we're basically looking at hiring a consultant, hopefully March 1st. That's the goal now.
We'll see, and that's why I keep asking for calendars, because we have this consultant now that's supposed to be looking at both an interim and the full, and now you have March. And are we gonna get any of this done before any of our dates?
We
That
will, but let me tell you something, I mean, these are all huge.
Oh,
We
I
don't-
know.
We don't always do a congestion management
Oh, I
process
know
update.
that.
We don't
That's
always
why
do a
we-
model update.
that's
These
what-
are huge pieces.
That's why we
right?
wanted an interim, was to give
Yes.
us the time to do all this correctly.
Well, that brings us up another point. So, do we need marching orders? We're pressing on the assumption that we will have an interim MTP update. That is in the MTP, that is in the RFP. And we're just proceeding on that assumption. Is that a good?
That's why I think it's appropriate to not have solutions in AMATS, because we're accepted that we're not actually pursuing solutions. So that's the only reason I'm on board with that.
Yay! Well,
Kind of like
Pardon me.
yeah.
Struggle.
There was a time, Ken. There was a time.
Well, I won't go into this. This is just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that we're going to need your input on. These 3 meetings, December, February, and April, you are going to be inundated. Please bring we'll have, protein bars and everything,
So you're telling me when I need to take my vacation?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's try it.
You need to get it on our calendars.
Oh,
Seriously, for all the work sessions that you want, you better get them on a calendar.
okay, do you have a preference? We'll do a poll.
Yeah.
How about that? We'll do
Yeah.
a full. Okay. So then, here's the schedule. This basically shows these, if you look at December, February, and April, those are the in-person meetings with the consultants. They're going to be here and give you the presentation. And then the status of the system report is one of the deliverables for this project. Now, one thing that I'd like you to realize is that we do need to start looking at measurable objectives for something. The feds want to see that. Teresa and I have talked about it. We don't think that it's right to just grab one and chew. Select maybe one corridor or maybe two corridors that we feel are key and critical, like the Glen Highway and maybe Spinard or Arctic or something like that. And come up with some measurable objectives. They're achievable. That's really important. And what they want to see is we're going to reduce single occupancy vehicles by X% by such and such a year. And that's hard to do, you know? So maybe for the Glen Highway, we could increase reliability. But reliability is one of the national goals. I think we're pretty well covered with the national goals with the performance measures that we have now. The only one that we really don't have anything on is reliability. With the congestion management process, monitoring process that we do now, we do travel speed runs once every 4 years. That's not exactly real-time data. I mean, you know, so we are going to be looking at some kind of real-time data collection, and it might just be a pilot project, just to demonstrate that we are moving in that direction. It might be baby steps, but we're going in that direction. So I'm excited about this project. I wrote the RFP, and I'm thrilled that we have the consultant we do, and I think we covered all bases with it, and I think that we'll make the feds happy, and we'll have something that we can use. So does anybody have any questions? I didn't really follow my form.
That's okay.
So Vivian, I I just have a comment. I think Cindy's, and Craig, you should just start setting these things up. I mean, you should set them up, already set one up for the end of November, set one up for the end of March, set one up for and so Vivian, the regional, where you're gathering the data for the congestion management does not include the Matsu. It's only the Bowl and Eagle River, correct?
Well, insofar, the network, when we define the network, we'll talk about that.
So,
The
but-
network is the road network, typically that's the one in the model.
Right.
And then it's also systems. It's also the systems network.
Okay. But when we're looking at a status of the systems report, are we going to look at the status of the system as it relates to the entire region or just the AMATS area?
That's a topic that we can talk, the network is, we'll want your input. But if it's, strategies might include interregional transit. I mean, so, you know. Or, you know.
Or not.
Bus rapid transit. Or autonomous vehicles. Anyway, thank you for your attention, and I don't want to scare you all, but it's going to be busy.
I suggest as soon as possible after the presentation meetings, you schedule a work session, so if there's a need to have another work session, we want it.
So before and after, on the same topic?
It's possible. I mean, if it's really in-depth and detailed, and, I mean,
Oh,
you can
that's good.
only,
That's
you
good.
can only concentrate on that, what, about an hour and a half. 2 hours.
Is there any opportunity, we're not planning any work sessions with the consultants, is that what I heard?
No work sessions with the consultant.
There's no opportunity for like are they gonna be here for a couple of days?
It might be possible for us to do a teleconference with them. They are doing a teleconference for us, for you all on, in November. So, and they seem to be pretty accommodating.
I'm wondering if we could meet with them the same day as the, or TAC or something, just have an opportunity to give us some idea, some time with some face
time with them. I don't know, it just seems like it.
Well, they will be here in December, February, and April. And they'll be on a conference call. So if you all think about the questions that you might want to ask them, because they'll be talking to you in November on the phone. We didn't have a ton of money for this project, so.
So what's happening in there at the same timeline with the MTP? Are there critical pieces of stuff that we're gonna be doing in that same time period?
Well, the MTP, if we get the consultant
That's March. Okay.
That's just gearing up, doing goals and
Right, right,
objectives,
right.
not spending a whole lot of time on that, but that's just, and the thing is, we can't really get going on the MTP until we get the results of the following update. And the status of the system report is basically chapter 4 of the MTP. So, we can do like the introduction, and we can do other things.
Thank you, Vivian.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that was items 16, 6D, correct? Okay. We still have the air quality.
Air quality,
trend.
Matt's gonna do the air quality.
Okay, and is that also presentation?
Looks that way.
Okay. I just have to bring that with me.
This we should have set.
You ready?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, my name is Matt Spichik. I'm an environmental engineer with the Anchorage Health Department Air Quality Program. I'll try to keep this brief, folks. I know you've got a long day already. In Anchorage, we monitor 3 criteria of pollutants: carbon monoxide, PM 2.5, and PM 10, air toxics, and pollen are extracurriculars that we do as time and funding permit. And we've, in recent years, had 4 monitoring sites in Anchorage, Turnagain being CO only, Garden having carbon monoxide, PM 10 and 2.5 monitors. Tudor is PM 10 only, that's our maximum exposure site along the busy Tudor roadway. Eagle River having coarse and fine particulate monitors. That's just a picture of the rooftop monitors at the Garden monitoring site. CO is actually a pollutant of decreasing concern for us. We've seen an improving trend over the years, and the IAM program went away in 2012 since it was no longer needed to maintain the federal air quality standard. Since 2013, we've had 2 monitoring sites for CO. Unfortunately, the Turnagain site is located in a building that sold just recently in September, so the new owner is declining to let us continue there. So we are in negotiations with EPA on how to meet our SIP commitments for sites, and that will include a public involvement process for EPA review. This graph shows the second maximum CO concentrations for each year amongst all monitors in operation. You can see the improving trend. We last exceeded the federal standard in 1996, and in recent years we've been around half of the 8-hour standard for CO as our second maximum concentration. For PM 2.5, we monitor primarily in neighborhoods or near residential areas because of the significance of wood smoke contributing to maximum or contributing to PM 2.5 on high concentration days. If we look at the data here, the plum bars down below are the annual average concentrations, and those compare with the dotted black line for the annual average standard, running about half the standard. Blue bars represent the 98th percentile annual concentration, and those compare against the 24-hour average standard. Up there is the red dotted line. So you can see our annual 98th percentiles are running about half to 2/3 of the federal standard. So we're looking good for now as far as our PM 2.5 concentrations, so long as we don't see
a significant increase in wood burning, similar to what happened in Fairbanks with people seeking alternatives to expensive home heating oil. PM10 is now our pollutant of major concern because if we look at the data, there's no obvious trend, but we have seen some high concentrations in recent years, and in the last couple of years we've had episodes of midwinter thaws, which rapidly melt snow and ice, the sediments get deposited on the roadway, and then when temperatures turn clear and cold again, that sediment goes airborne until there's new snow cover. And as a result of two such episodes in 2013 and 2014, we now have 3 exceedances on the books. That is all that EPA allows us for any 3-year period. So one more exceedance before the end of 2015, we would be in violation of the PM10 standard. So we're kind of in a tight spot, having to work very closely with state and municipal street maintenance crews to respond rapidly to any potential exceedance conditions. And they would do that by applying magnesium chloride dust palliative as a way to try to hold down the dust concentrations. And that's a tall order to do in the middle of winter when they were just geared up for plowing roads. But they've got a plan for doing that. I mentioned extracurriculars air toxics is something that we periodically monitor when we can get grant funding from EPA. A study in 2008-2009 was a baseline study prior to implementation of MSAT-2 rules, which are the mobile source air toxics rules implemented by EPA in 2011, and those required refineries to reduce the benzene content in gasoline to a maximum of 1.3% by volume. So we did a baseline study in 2008-2009. You can see the annual mean for that study was 1.1 part per billion of ambient benzene. We repeated the study in 2013, and we see about half the ambient concentrations of benzene as a result of the lower benzene content in gasoline. But an interesting point from the prior study was that indoor concentrations can be 4 to 7 times higher if you have a home with an attached garage. So the takeaway message there is try to remove gasoline sources from the garage. It's not so much the car, it's all the other small engines and stored gasoline that evaporate and make their way into the home. The car has a sealed system capturing the vapors. Any questions? I kind of rolled through that fast. I'm going to back up to anything.
Matt, are you going to give this show and tell to the policy committee?
Yes.
You might want to tell them what happens if we break in 2015.
That was my question, is what happens if we have our final
We'll
exceedance?
go on the bad list.
Yeah. Well, what's
The bad
that?
list just isn't, the bad list just isn't for air quality and the EPA. It's
related to transportation funding.
It's related to our transportation funding, and then the AMATS requirement on as our operating agreements, transportation and air quality, then we are in a cycle of non-attainment. It wouldn't matter if it's PM10 or CO. We are into that little go road for a long, long time. So Matt, what do you think is what is, I mean, if you were in control, what is the thing that needs to be done to make sure that we do not exceed in 15? A lot of chemicals on the street?
Unfortunately, yes.
All right.
It's expensive.
So can we get the chemicals?
Unfortunately, they're very hard to come by.
Okay.
At least last year, there was a major demand all throughout the U.S. So everybody was competing for the same resources. This year, I understand that there's a tanker truck of magnesium chloride coming up, destined for the state of Alaska and the municipality. I don't know when that's due here. They have a minimal supply right now, but it also has a shelf life, so they can't just store all they need for the next 3 years. it apparently precipitates and becomes much less effective.
Right.
So it's a challenge, absolutely. Perhaps we may want to consider other forms of dust palliative, but we need to be able to respond rapidly to.
So outside the bad air part, what happens, I mean, we should probably remind ourselves what happens to the tip. I mean, we have to do conformity, we have to redo conformity for the tip before we can advance any construction projects, before we can start any construction projects.
If we exceed, then we have to make a recommendation that we're not attainment area. EPA has to formally declare us non-attainment area.
Yeah.
Then we have to develop a plan for the non-attainment area, submit the plan, EPA has to approve the plan, but once they would declare us a non-attainment area, it's only at that point that then we would have to do all the extra hoop to root. And then you have the whole planning thing, and then you have to have control measures, and then you have to have, you know.
But Lance is right. We would love to avoid that because once you're on the bad list, you're there for decades. And it's a lot of work to get off.
Forever, you know.
I mean, even if you don't exceed in 16, 17, 18, and forever, you've had 3 bad years, you're on the bad list for a decade.
Correct.
Or whatever.
Well, if
Until-
they formally
Designate.
But sometimes they're slow. And then if you get a good year, then you have a clean data year, and you can say, okay, is this a rolling average, or is this just a?
Because it's a 3-year period,
Right.
more than 3 in a 3
Calendar year period.
So,
Consecutive.
Right.
Yes.
so it's so there's these rules, and sometimes if they're really slow to get one, then you make these cases and you not get them. The trick is though, how fast EPA would formally redesignate us, because until that point, we're okay.
Okay.
But
But we would have that little sword hanging over us
Yeah.
until they did it. I mean, if they
Well-
busted in 15 and they designate us in 18, we don't have to do anything for 16 and 17, but when 18 rolls around, even if we've been clean, we have to apply those new SIP measures for PM10, yeah?
Maybe.
All right.
It's not quite, it's not doing.
I agree. I think it's.
Let's just avoid it.
Well, I mean, I think but what happens is that if our street maintenance people, both at DOT and MOA, don't have the tools to keep us in conformity, because I think it is the dust on the streets. I mean, they're not gonna not sand the streets this winter.
Yeah.
And then they're gonna have to sweep.
Yeah, I think they're prepared. They're vigilant. They know the situation. They know
Yeah.
the circumstance. They're prepared and ready to go apply chloride. And I think if you look historically at our PM10 levels, most years we don't have any exceedances.
Yeah.
So it depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, but I tend to be an optimist. I think our chances are pretty good to
We
get.
could not drive the buses into bus pull-outs where they kick all that crap
Well,
out.
that's absolutely true.
I'm telling you.
Yeah, I mean,
Just-
buses are.
Just do the,
Especially where you
put the
know where
chemicals,
the
put the chemicals in the bus
monitor
pull-outs.
I know where we have
is.
it.
Do you know where the monitor is? It's like right.
Oh, yeah, I know, it's right there, right by our bus stop.
Yeah, so you maybe might want to go.
Just-
No, I'm just gonna start buying stuff to pour on the bus stop.
And part of the challenge there is that we're asking municipal crews to maintain or to treat state roads. but,
I was gonna say, just in a bucket over
EPA frowns on that, I think. All right, thanks, Matt.
Get off the bus.
Selfie while you're
Big snow, big snow.
Okay, so we have one more information. Thank you very much for the presentation, for scaring us. No, you can't. Get something else to. All right, so we have one.
Just to point out real quickly, in your packet, you have this document here, which has the bike lane symbol at the bottom. That's just an update, it's just the informational handout to you, to update on you on the status of that bike lane implementation that was funded in 13, 14 time frame. So, take it with you and go. That's it.
That's fine. All we have left to say is related to the policy committee meets 2 weeks from today, and we meet November 6th. It is 1:14. We are.